think about the pros and cons of having a temple, a permanent temple, permanent house of God? What, based on the story of the Bible, what we see in Scripture, what are the pros and cons of having such a structure?
It lends a little more to a ceremonial environment.
How so? And especially if we think about the tabernacle, what's different about having a building versus a tabernacle?
Building versus being outside and being.
Okay, so like patriarchal versus having a structure itself.
Right.
Okay. What about, do you think there is any difference between the tabernacle and the temple as far as how you would think about those two different structures? Anybody else think that might be significant?
Located.
Okay. So tough to move the temple. And portability would be something that would be different for having a tabernacle. What about how you would think about this thing that would be among you?
Gravitate toward big, important, special set apart places, like the White House. You don't have the president. The president doesn't live in their house. And that moves wherever it is every 4 years. We have this, and there's logistical reasons for that too. I feel like we as people are drawn to these temple-like buildings, not just for religious things, but for everything. They make us feel something is more important for greater prominence.
Yeah. So we have some parallels in our systems of governance and things. Interesting that we have. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, Randy. Just kind of buzzing in my ear. If you maybe just turn it down a little bit. Yeah, so there is some sort of parallels there.
It is an edifice of holiness. It's supposed to be the place where God dwells. As you approach it, you're supposed to be holy as well.
Yeah, so we have this holiness, this holy factor, and if we set it in a particular place, it stays there in that particular place, then that has consequences, good consequences that David was seeking, but also it comes with negative consequences as we see. What are some of those negative consequences that build up?
Becomes a shrine, or it itself is worshipped, kind of. So it becomes holy, but it's also subject to destruction and desecration, I guess.
Yeah, so once you have a place that you have invited God to come into, or that he has said he will put his name there, then there are real consequences for your actions, for the actions of others. How do the people of Jerusalem think about the temple, especially in unhealthy ways, as its time draws to an end?
When Jesus talked about it, it was used as a marketplace. It was improperly, Jesus described it when he cleared the temple. So things are bad, things are bad.
Okay. I'm specifically thinking of the end of the first temple.
They come with first representation of how great
just imagine being Solomon, right? You're the one that God has chosen to build his temple in Jerusalem. How could you not, like I'm listening to the Lord of the Rings with my kids in the car. And in the first book, this ring is so dangerous because it gives the wearer ultimate power. And so everybody's kind of tempted to take this ring. But if you were given this thing that you're the one person that God has entrusted with the wisdom and the responsibility, the authority to build his house, it's like that would be so tempting to be like, well, yeah, of course, I'm the wisest man that's ever lived. I'm the best king, the son of David, the fulfillment of all these things. Like, just imagine the temptation that's there before Solomon and that he falls to. Yeah, this thing. And again, it's not that God doesn't want a temple. Like that's how he fixes the world, right? It's through his temple presence amongst us, amongst this church. It's just it wasn't ready for this thing yet. So we're going to look at Ezekiel. Hopefully you took a little bit of time to read or watch some videos about Ezekiel, because if you didn't, this is going to be an uphill battle, because Ezekiel is long and it's complicated and it's pretty intense. So hopefully you got a little bit of stuff. For people that did do a little bit of reading ahead and maybe watching the video, what are some things you noticed about Ezekiel that we need to keep in mind as we study Ezekiel today? Or if you didn't do some read ahead, but what you can remember about the book of Ezekiel.
Visions were really strange.
Okay, lots of visions, lots of very intense visions with a lot of images that are strange, seem very strange. Okay. And my sermon today is about symbols, so I'm going to try not to start preaching my sermon while I'm teaching my class. But yeah, a lot of symbols. And the one thing I'll say about symbols that I will repeat in my sermon is that symbols are not arbitrary. Symbols are very intense patterns that point to deeper realities of the cosmos, right, of our place within it. And so when you see symbols popping up in prophecies, you see prophets doing crazy, strange-looking things, it's meant to grab your attention, but it's not an arbitrary thing that he's just doing for funsies. It's a very symbolic act that's meant to point to a pattern of human behavior that you need to attend to, right? Maybe you're doing something wrong, or maybe you're not doing something at all that you need to do. And that's what the prophets are here to point to.
The symbols and the visions and the messages of Ezekiel take a common and well understood social issue or a taboo, and it focuses on that taboo or on that issue or that social norm and cranks it up 1,000-fold.
Yep.
So, the messages in most cases, I think every case here, don't come until the end of the 1,000-fold. For instance, a vision that lasts for an extended period of time. There's no explaining the vision during the vision itself. It's only at the end of the vision that Ezekiel has the opportunity or attempts to explain it to somebody. And the intensity of it is like supersaturated spices and supersaturated preservatives and supersaturated. Jesus does some of the same thing, only does it in the parables where he says, I tell you 7 times 70. And he magnifies the intensity of something. Looked on another man's wife, I could pluck her eye out. The way he intensifies Jesus' intensity intensifies his messages is similar in some ways to the way God intensifying messages through Ezekiel.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there's this really concentrated symbolic language, images that we see all throughout Ezekiel. There are other prophets as well, right? So Isaiah, Jeremiah, these major prophets, these significant figures within Israel. What's different about Ezekiel? Why do you think Ezekiel, in particular, is so intense? What's different about his situation and who he is and where he is and maybe why?
He's a priest.
He's a priest. Okay, that's very, very important. It's going to be very important for our discussion. What else do we know about Ezekiel?
Exile.
He's in exile. So he's a priest in exile. Okay. What's that mean? What conclusions can we draw from that?
Means he's like an appendage. He's there without a purpose.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like he's not where he's supposed to be, right? The priest has to live within walking distance of the temple because that's your whole deal. You spend your job during the year is to teach people Torah, and then every once in a while you get called up to the bench to go in there and make some sacrifices to offer some incense. If you're the creme de la creme, then maybe you're a high priest at some point, right? But he is not anywhere near Jerusalem and taken into exile. And it seems like it's on his 30th birthday that he gets this vision. And the 30th birthday is when you can actually serve as a priest at the temple. And so, what would that do to somebody? What would that do to a person?
Tremendous disappointment that your career, which is so clear to you up until age 29 and 364 days, 365th day, all of a sudden your career takes on an entirely different abnormal direction. This is my ministry, this is my priesthood.
Seems to be unique in that God uses the Holy Spirit to enter him, set him up on his feet, take him in visions to various locations. So he seems to be a chosen vessel for God to fill his word.
Yeah. What would you imagine? Last question, just thinking about Ezekiel himself before we kind of get into the text a little bit more. What would you imagine somebody who's been taken into exile, right? So remember, exile means that somebody has come in, captured you from your homeland, and brought you to another place, and now forces you to work in some capacity for them. So you don't get to see your family, you don't get to see your friends, you don't get to see your homeland. You're now this stranger in a strange place, doing other people's bidding. How would they feel about foreigners? What would you imagine that this person would have to say about foreigners, especially within relation to Israel?
The people themselves or Ezekiel in particular?
Ezekiel. What if put yourself in Ezekiel's shoes, you were just run of the day, business as usual. What would you think of foreign influence and foreign people, and particularly the kingdoms that do this kind of thing, like take people into exile?
Seems like it would be hard if you understood that your people were God's people, and God allowed a foreign nation to take you, and that we would look at those people as an enemy, as evil, of course, and then it would be hard to understand how God would allow that to happen.
Yeah, there'd be some sort of cognitive dissonance, right? That you're God's chosen people, you're a priest of God's chosen people, but you're not anywhere near the temple able to do your job. And for whatever reason, God has allowed this to happen. And so,
He also recognizes, again through the Holy Spirit, that the people and the nation are not where they were supposed to be. Obviously, they're in exile. And priests previous to Ezekiel, you know, had the good fortune, good pleasure, God's grace to actually preach to the people while they still had a chance to repent.
mhm,
Now they're in exile. They're suffering for their sins. And the message has to be impressed upon them that you're still suffering for your sin and your rejection of God. So, however many years they've been in exile while they're sitting there, they're getting used to life in Babylon, in Assyria. They're getting used to it. They're making their accommodations. They're transacting their business. And they're nowhere ready at all for true worship.
Can I read 4 verses from Psalms 137, very short?
yes,
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept, and we remembered Zion. Upon the willows in the midst of it we hung our harps, for there our captives demanded of us songs, and our tormentors jubilation, saying, Sing for us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song?
read the last verse of this one.
Blessed be the one who seizes and dashes your children against the rock.
That's the attitude of the exiles. This intense anger, frustration that they're not where they're supposed to be. They're not in God's chosen land. And then it's them trying to figure out why they're here and why God has allowed this to happen. Right? And so this is what Ezekiel's visions are trying to lead them to, trying to help them understand. And this, Ezekiel's book is, let's just get into it. So what's he see in chapter 1? What's the vision that appears to Ezekiel? What's that? Yeah, it's like a
On wheels.
chariot throne thing. It's got some wild creatures about it. And so, so there's just a lot of intense already, just boom, we're right into it. First chapter of Ezekiel, we already have this wild image. Now, I just want to quickly look at the throne guardians, right? This cherubim, who we've already seen multiple times in our study of the temple. Here they appear maybe in their most true form that a human can see, that a human can understand, right? It's not a statue that sits in the temple. It's not a statue that sits on top of the Ark of the Covenant. These are real creatures. Each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight. Their feet were like a calf's hoofs that gleamed like burnished bronze. 4 sides, human hands for faces, wings for them. Their wings touched one another, just like the wings in the throne room and the Holy of Holies do. Their faces did not turn when they moved. Each went straight forward. Each had the face of a man, and all 4 had the face of a lion on the right, the face of a bull on the left, and all 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces, right? And so, you can try and 3D model this out, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. But the important thing to understand about symbolism is that just because something is symbolic doesn't mean that it's not real. So often I think we think of symbols as, oh, the author made this thing up in order to point to something else, which is real. But really what you need to understand for symbols is that it's a condensation of meaning, right? So meaning's been crammed down into this thing, into a word or an idea that's working in the community of words and ideas around it in order to help us understand a bigger thing in a very small amount of space, right? So what guards God's throne? What guards and carries this presence around? Well, it's the cherubim, and they happen to be composed of a bunch of different stuff. Okay, but all that stuff is so the human is kind of the central face here, and then on the right or their left would be the lion, and then the left, their right would be the bull. Okay, and so that kind of represents all of creation. You have the foreign, the wild things, right? The lions, and you also have the domestic, the bulls. Okay, and so there's this kind of dividing up creation in half there. But also the lions eat bulls, right? And so the bulls kind of become the lion, right? It's like this identity. It's about identity, and it's about how does God put meaning into the cosmos? Well, the way that God puts meaning in the cosmos is through humans, right, and down into creation, into the lower animals, and then the idea of the eagle is continually meaning coming down. It's meant to help us see that when we think about these figures, the cherubim, they point to who and what God is. And God is much more than his creation. And so it's only by God's grace that he's allowing meaning and this reason and all of our experience to come down into us. And it's only through this radical just imagine facing one of these creatures, right? It's like we're in trouble, right? If one of these things appears before you, it's like it's a lion, a bull, an eagle, with the intelligence of a human, right? It's all the fiercest predators and most powerful animals all in one, there in front of you, right? And so it's all of those things, and it's all smushed into one moment, one image. It has wheels because it's mobile. And where is this thing appearing? Where is it appearing at? Yeah, which river is that? Yeah. So there's this river in Babylon. Why is God there? Where's God supposed to be? Where's God normally? It's in the temple. It's in Jerusalem. And he comes and arrives here in Babylon. And so for this priest of God, is this good news? Is this bad news? Good? Why good? What's that? Okay, so there are Israelites that have been taken into exile. Remember, at this point, Jerusalem hasn't been destroyed. The temple hasn't been destroyed. They're the first waves of exiles that have come to Babylon, and so some people are in Israel. Some people are still or have been taken to Babylon. Okay. So good, bad, yeah, he left. Right? He's not where we expect him to be, for sure. Right? This is what the prophet sees. And then later in chapter 11, we see Ezekiel gets to really see the inside of the temple for the first time in the vision. Right? Think about that. He's a priest. He's never done his job in the way he has prepared his life to do so. And the first glimpse inside the temple, what does he see? Yeah, these idols, right? All these. It's a panoply of idols. It's a smorgasbord. It's not what he wants to see in the temple. It's all these other gods. And then after he sees all these idols, then what does he see? You can turn over to chapter 11 if you want to remind him. What happens after he sees all the idols being worshipped in the temple? It's at the end of the chapter.
Verse 18,
Yeah.
where it goes, where he sees God, or he sees the creatures and God going to Babylon.
Yeah, it's almost like these stationary things, the Ark of the Covenant and the cherubim that have been made in the Holy of Holies, almost like they come to life, lift up, and they shoot out of the temple, right? They head east, and they go to Babylon, right? And so that's a bad thing, right? Grant said that's a bad thing. Could Israel's enemies destroy the temple of God in Jerusalem while God's there? Yeah, we'll say no. We'll say no. God wouldn't allow that to happen while he's there, but when he leaves, it's kind of fair game, right? It's okay. You want to rely on these foreign gods. You want to pray to them in my temple. We'll let them come in. We'll let the people that they control come in, and you can see how my temple, how my walls, how my city fares without me there. Because God isn't, he's not a sharer when it comes to worship. It's not a sharer when it comes to what's supposed to be happening in that temple.
Would it be, is that kind of a similar thing to when the curtain was ripped in Jesus died and the curtain was ripped, and is it a similar kind of message?
What's similar about it and what's different?
I always understood, like, when the curtain was ripped from the bottom up, that it was a sign that God wasn't there, that the temple was no longer functioning as a dwelling place for God.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think it's worth considering for a moment. So, what's the function of this veil here that sits in front of the Holy of Holies? Separates it, right? And so to tear that means what? Yeah, the separation is no longer there, right? And so I think it's similar in some ways, but it's also different in that if the symbol was the veil is torn, then the veil would have been torn, right? But the symbol is instead that the presence is moving out of this particular place. And so the veil is more of a universal symbol, I think, right? If this thing is no longer here, then this thing doesn't function in the way that it was. Whereas if God's presence leaves, it could come back, right? If we, if God says if you seek me with all your heart, I'll bring you back and out of exile. I'll be your God again. But I think it's a different idea with some similarities. Yeah.
Solomon had biblical indication, some kind of visible, audible, something of God filling that temple that they all saw.
Yeah.
Like he was coming to dwell there.
Yeah. Yeah, that when they rebuild the temple, that doesn't happen again. And so it seems like something different in the second temple is going on.
Most people Ezekiel writes to verse, they're all rebellious. He's trying to turn back. Maybe that's why the vision just so most of them are not. It's not like, oh, okay, now we see what's happening. We'll repent. We can come back to this again. They have a chance.
Yeah.
Lion's share.
Yeah, and later in Ezekiel we get this survivor, right? He stumbles into the exiles' camp and kind of reports the destruction of everything. Let's look in the last few minutes at chapter 47. So there's this really cool image, symbolism, and Ezekiel takes this like a drone tour of this new, bigger, better temple that's going to be built. He gets to see it all, and he reports on all the dimensions and how much better it's going to be. And then in chapter 47, it says, "Then he brought me back to the door of the house, and behold, waters flowing from under the threshold. The waters flowing down from the right side of the house, from south of the altar. And he brought me out by the way of the north gate, led me round on the outside of the outer gate by the way of the gate that faces east. Behold, waters trickling down from the south side. The man went toward the east with a line in his hand. He measured 1,000 cubits. He led me through the water reaching the ankles. Again, he measured 1,000, led me through the water, and the water reaching the knees. 1,000 through the water, reached up to the loins. Again, he measured 1,000. It was a river that I could not ford, for the water had risen enough to swim in, a river that could not be forded. He said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? And then he brought me back to the bank of the river. Now when I had returned, behold, on the bank of the river there were very many trees on one side and on the other. He said to me, these waters go out toward the eastern region, down into the Arabah, toward the sea, being made to flow into the sea, and the waters of the sea become fresh. So these waters are flowing out of Jerusalem, out of this place. It's not specifically called Jerusalem, not specifically called the temple. They're flowing out of this place. They flow out and into the Dead Sea, right? So the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because it's dead. It's full of salt, but it's also in this really depressed region, not like metaphorically depressed, but like physically depressed. There's two tectonic plates right near Israel that are pulling apart, and so the Dead Sea sits right in that lowest part, so it's actually below sea level, and so all the rivers in the area kind of flow down into there, but there's no outlet, so it slowly kind of evaporates and drains back into the earth, but there's no way to get out. And so stuff dies there because it's very salty, but also there's no way to change the water. It doesn't flow through. It just goes there and stops. There's actually kind of an ecological crisis going on in Israel to this day because of the Dead Sea and overusing the water there. Anyways, the point is that this is an image of complete resurrection, right? This water goes to this place, and everything that goes into that is you can't eat it. It's all dead. But from this dead place is new life, right? This vegetation and animals and things all come and gather here. And so my question to you is, what this symbolic vision that he's having, right? What are some things that come to mind, some associations and some ideas that are coming to your mind as you think about this water that's flowing out from this temple, going out and bringing resurrection?
Image of paradise.
Image of paradise. So we already saw this in Eden, right? These rivers that flow out and water the whole world.
See it again.
We see it again in Revelation, right? So It's these touch points of this the same image of the temple, which waters flow out of, bringing restoration.
Isn't the pattern too that we see like salvation or restoration through the water? Isn't that something we see time and again?
Yeah, and so you can trace these ideas of water, and remember that, and this is again something I'm going to be talking about in my sermon today. So hopefully not too many spoilers. But water in itself doesn't have one meaning as a symbol, right? Water can mean judgment, right? If it's Noah's flood, it can mean a new creation. If it's Noah's flood, right? At the end, that's everything emerges out from the water again, just like it did in Genesis 1, which is the original creation. And so, by itself, water doesn't have one meaning, but in network with these other ideas, it has these other meanings. And so, for water in this case, it's flowing out. It's generating all this new life, even from the deadest place that Ezekiel knew about, right? The Dead Sea. It's generating this stuff. So it absolutely has to do with that, and baptism is the same idea, right? And baptism gets started in the Jordan, which is kind of what this is replacing, right? This river is replacing the Jordan, which is the major river that flows into the Dead Sea. But while the Jordan just ends up in death, this river brings new life, something completely new, restoration. What else?
Is Jesus referring to Ezekiel when he said, I am the living water?
That's a good question. We probably don't have time to talk about all that Jesus was talking about there, because that's, he's part of a larger festival that they're celebrating at the time. That's when it's one of those statements. But yeah, I think part of what he's saying is related to this idea of this water flowing out. And is this water just for Israel? How do we know that? Yeah, it's kind of going out into the whole world. It's for the healing of the nations, right? It's it's all these images that come up again later in the Bible that keep coming up. And so yeah, Jesus is this water that is open. It's open to all. It provides this life in this new way. And so yeah, so this, hopefully we can see that Ezekiel is trying to help us understand that there's a temple coming that's going to bring this new life into the world. It's not anything like anything you've ever seen before. And so when the second temple is built, and we get the report of that in Ezra, Nehemiah, and it's fairly disappointing, we shouldn't be surprised, because the temple that we're expecting isn't going to be like the old temple. It's going to be like what we see before. It's going to be something different and new, and more. God's presence will be there in a greater way, not in a lesser or insignificant way. Any final questions, comments, thoughts before we wrap up today?
So I was wondering, in 1 through 3, why did he repeat so often about the wings?
Oh, the wing nature of, yeah, that's a good question. What do we think? Why is it emphasized that these creatures have lots of wings and yeah.
Well, wings will get you anywhere you need to go.
Yeah.
And God, his creatures and his servants anywhere that he wants them.
Yeah, God has full reign to go anywhere, and that's one of the main points that Ezekiel makes in his whole book, is that God's presence is not contained at this temple. It's not here. We can't trap him like a bird or something and make him do what we want. He's gonna, if we don't repent, if we don't change, then he will leave, and that will be bad for us. It'll be bad for everybody, because we're supposed to be people that are carrying the good news about him.
So Ezekiel has two visions in this chapter. One vision is the earthly dynasties that are coming from the point of Assyria, Babylon, Greek, and Rome. It's four sides, four different faces. And they are winged because they have the authority of God. Each one of those dynasties are appointed by God. And they're also acclaimed by all of mankind because all of the thousands of eyes look out at them. But then verse 22 and verse 26 says, in the expanse above them is the throne, and the throne itself is the throne of God. And everything that you saw with regard to splendor for those four winged creatures are all embodied in that one throne in God himself. His appearance is the appearance Ezekiel is to preach about. So continuity there for Ezekiel is totally lost. He does not know about Babylonians or Greeks or the Romans yet to come. But that's our message.
Yeah, I do apologize. We can't spend more time thinking about the symbols and ideas in Ezekiel, which I'm sure I've done a poor job explaining to their full extent. Next week, we're going to look at Ezra chapter 3 through 6 primarily, so make sure you take a look at that. And thank you for your attention today.
Andy, where are you? I have lost count of you. I didn't see you.
Okay, so the way I have it.